My name is Jason. I am 28 years old, and I was standing in the middle of a freezing, glass-walled boardroom when scalding hot coffee soaked through my white shirt, burning my skin. The scent of expensive cologne and sheer panic was thick in the air. My boss, Richard, a 55-year-old man with a cruel smile, held the empty ceramic mug in his hand. He didn't trip. He looked right into my eyes, deliberately tipped the cup forward, and then he laughed. It was a loud, booming laugh that echoed off the walls as 20 senior executives stared at me in absolute, terrified silence. The physical pain of the dark liquid searing my chest was nothing compared to the crushing weight of the public humiliation. My hands shook violently, my face burned red, and every instinct in my body screamed at me to punch him. But I just stood there, paralyzed, a junior employee being treated like literal garbage for everyone's twisted amusement. I thought that moment of utter degradation was the worst day of my life, but I had absolutely no idea that less than 24 hours later, his own wife would look at me with tears streaming down her face, call me her son, and trigger a chain of events that would completely destroy his. Before I explain exactly how that crazy, unbelievable moment happened and the massive secret that flipped my entire world upside down, I want to take a quick pause. I am always amazed by how far these stories travel and the incredible community we are building here. So please, drop a comment down below and tell me what city, state, or country you are listening from today. I really love reading through your comments and knowing where my voice is reaching. Now, let me take you back to the very beginning. Because to understand the absolute shock on Richard's face that next morning, you need to understand exactly why I was working in that miserable building in the first place. For my entire life, I always felt like a massive piece of my soul was missing. I grew up in the state foster care system, bouncing from house to house until I aged out at 18. I never knew my real parents. All I had in this world was a single, tarnished silver locket that the social workers found tucked inside my baby blanket when I was dropped off at the hospital. Inside that heavy silver locket was a faded photograph of a young woman with sad eyes and an engraving on the back that just said E. Vance. For years, that name was my only connection to my past. I spent countless lonely nights staring at the ceilings of rundown apartments, wondering if she was still out there, or if giving me up was the hardest choice she ever made. I refused to let my circumstances define me. For 5 brutal years, I worked the graveyard shift at a local diner, scrubbing greasy plates until 3 in the morning. Every cent I didn't need for survival, I shoved into a shoebox. When I saved $5,000, I brought it to Mike, a 60-year-old retired detective. I begged him to find her. It took Mike 6 agonizing months, but one rainy afternoon, he called me in. He slid a folder across his desk containing a current photograph of the woman from my locket. Her name was Eleanor. She was now 48 years old, incredibly wealthy, and married to Richard Sterling, the powerful and ruthless CEO of Sterling Innovations. My biological mother was alive. She was a billionaire, and she was living only 2 hours away. A million emotions exploded in my chest. Part of me wanted to drive straight to her mansion and scream that I was the baby she abandoned. But the part of me terrified of rejection held me back. What if she didn't want me? I couldn't just blindside her. I needed to see her from a distance first, to understand her world. So I completely fabricated a reason to move to her city. I applied for dozens of entry-level jobs at Sterling Innovations. After weeks of relentless applying, I was hired as a junior administrative assistant in the archives department. It was basically a glorified mailroom job, sorting files and delivering documents across the cold corporate headquarters. But I didn't care about the terrible pay. I was finally in the building. The environment at Sterling Innovations was suffocating and cutthroat. On my first day, I met my immediate supervisor, Sarah, a 27-year-old woman with tired eyes but a warm smile. Sarah noticed my nervousness right away and took me under her wing. We quickly became close friends, eating our sad-packed lunches in the cramped basement break room. One evening, after a particularly exhausting shift of moving heavy boxes, I broke down and told her the truth. I showed her the locket and explained that the wife of the CEO was my biological mother. Sarah was absolutely stunned. She sat in silence, staring at the faded picture of Eleanor before grabbing my hand. She promised to keep my secret, but her expression turned incredibly serious as she issued a dark warning. "You need to be extremely careful, Jason," Sarah whispered, checking to make sure no one was listening. "Richard is a monster. He thrives on humiliating his employees to make himself feel powerful. He married into Eleanor's family money, and everyone knows she is the real owner of the company, but she is too gentle to stop him. He controls everything here with an iron fist. Her words sent a cold shiver down my spine. I had seen Richard a few times from afar, an imposing man who verbally berated people until they were practically in tears. Knowing that this cruel tyrant was married to my mother made my stomach churn. It made me even more determined to observe her, to find a moment to speak to her alone, completely away from his toxic, suffocating presence. The first time I actually saw Eleanor in person, my heart stopped beating. I was pushing a heavy mail cart across the main lobby when she walked through the glass doors. She looked exactly like an older version of the photo in my locket, carrying a deep, undeniable sadness in her eyes. My hands gripped the handle of the mail cart so tightly my knuckles turned white. Every fiber of my being wanted to run across the marble floor and ask her why she left me. But before I could take a single step, Richard appeared. He grabbed her arm with a firm, controlling grip and muttered something harsh in her ear. I saw her flinch, her shoulders dropping as she nodded silently and followed him. Seeing him touch her like that ignited a fire of pure hatred inside me. I kept my head down, trying to figure out a plan, but invisibility is impossible there. Richard eventually noticed me, and for some twisted reason, he decided he absolutely hated me. Maybe because I didn't instantly cower when he walked by. He became his favorite new target for petty cruelty. He would intentionally drop staffs of paper on the floor right as I walked past, demanding I pick them up. Every time he mocked my cheap clothes, I had to bite my tongue so hard I tasted blood. I endured it because I needed to stay in that building to reach Eleanor, but the stress was eating me alive. Sarah begged me to just quit, to write Eleanor a letter and leave before Richard did something unforgivable, but I stubbornly waited for the perfect opportunity to speak with her. The day that changed everything started with a massive quarterly board meeting. Sarah and I were tasked with printing 50 copies of a heavy financial report that Richard was presenting. We were running on zero sleep, desperately trying to get everything perfect, while Richard screamed at vice presidents down the hall. At 10 o'clock, Sarah handed me the massive stack of bound reports. Her hands were shaking. "Take these into the boardroom," she said, her voice trembling. "Just put them on the table and get out as fast as you can. He is looking for someone to destroy today." I pushed open the heavy oak doors, and the silence hit me like a physical wall. 20 powerful people sat around a glass table, and Richard was pacing at the head of it, looking absolutely furious. As soon as I stepped in, Richard locked his cold eyes on me. "You are 3 minutes late, you incompetent fool," he barked, his voice dripping with venom. I didn't argue. I kept my eyes down, walked over, and distributed the thick reports. I placed his copy precisely in front of him. But he wasn't looking at the report. He was glaring at me with pure disgust. "Are you stupid, boy?" he asked loudly. "I asked for my coffee 10 minutes ago. Where is it?" Getting his coffee wasn't my job, but in that room, truth didn't matter. I quickly apologized, rushed to the side table where a carafe of freshly brewed boiling coffee was sitting, and poured a cup into a ceramic mug, my hands trembling under the intense pressure of 20 pairs of eyes watching my every move. I walked back and placed the hot mug gently on the glass table. "Your coffee, sir," I murmured. Richard looked at the mug, then up at me with a sickening, cruel smile. He picked up the mug by the handle. Maintaining direct, unbroken eye contact with me, he extended his arm, tilted his wrist, and deliberately poured the entire cup of boiling hot coffee directly onto my chest. The searing heat tore through my thin cotton shirt instantly, burning my skin like acid. I gasped in shock, stumbling backward. The pain was intense, but the physical agony was completely eclipsed by the profound, soul-crushing humiliation. "Oops," Richard said mockingly, and then he laughed, a victorious laugh that shattered the silence. A few executives nervously chuckled. I stood there, tripping, begging silently for someone to defend me, but they all just looked away. In my panic, I grabbed at my chest, trying to pull the scalding fabric away from my skin. As I aggressively yanked at my collar, my fingers caught the thin silver chain I had worn around my neck my entire life. The chain snapped with a sharp pop. I didn't even realize it in the chaos. The heavy silver locket slipped down my wet shirt and landed silently on the thick carpet near Richard's leather chair. I couldn't breathe. The laughter ringing in my ears was deafening. Without a word, I turned and practically ran out of the boardroom. I barged into the men's restroom, locked myself in a stall, and finally let the tears fall. I stripped off the ruined shirt, running cold water over my blistered skin. I felt so small, so utterly defeated. I had come to this company to find a mother, and instead, I found a level of cruelty I didn't know existed. When I emerged wearing a spare uniform shirt from a janitor's closet, Sarah was waiting in the hallway. She had heard what happened and immediately pulled me into a tight hug. "I can't do this anymore, Sarah," I sobbed. "I'm leaving." We walked back to my desk in the basement, and I blindly started throwing my things into a cardboard box. It was then, as I reached up to touch my chest for comfort, that my blood ran completely cold. My fingers touched bare skin. The chain was gone. I frantically patted down my pockets and dumped my backpack upside down. Nothing. Absolute panic gripped my throat. That locket was my entire identity, the only proof of who I was. I realized with a sickening drop in my stomach that it must have fallen off in the boardroom during the struggle, leaving my most precious possession in the very room where I was broken. I looked at Sarah, my eyes wide with terror. "My locket," I whispered. "I dropped it in the boardroom." Sarah's face went pale, warning me not to go back up there. But I couldn't leave my history lying on that floor. I sprinted back to the executive floor. The meeting had ended, and the cleaning crew was already vacuuming. I frantically searched the carpet, crawling on my hands and knees, but it was nowhere to be found. The cleaning lady looked at me with pity. "If you're looking for the silver necklace, Mr. Sterling picked it up," she said quietly. "He took it into his office." My heart stopped. The man who had just humiliated me was holding the only connection I had to my mother. I was too broken to confront him right then. I went home, threw myself onto my bed, and stared at the ceiling, feeling entirely empty and defeated. I didn't sleep a single second that night. By the time the sun came up, my fear had evaporated, replaced by a cold, hardened resolve. I didn't care if he fired me or called the police. I was going to get my property back. I marched into the lobby at 8 in the morning and took the elevator straight to the top floor. Richard's personal assistant looked panicked. "Jason, go right in. Mr. Sterling is expecting you, and his wife is with him." My steps faltered. Eleanor was there. I pushed open the heavy oak doors to the CEO's massive office. Richard was sitting behind his enormous mahogany desk with a smug expression, but my eyes immediately darted to the right. Eleanor was sitting on the edge of a white leather sofa, looking absolutely terrible. Her eyes were red and swollen, and she was visibly trembling. In her shaking hands, Eleanor was clutching my silver locket. When I walked in, Richard slammed his hands on the desk. "Ah, the clumsy idiot arrives," he sneered. "I told my wife about your little performance yesterday, and then leaving this cheap piece of garbage on my floor. I was going to throw it in the trash, but Eleanor saw it on my desk last night." I ignored Richard entirely. My eyes were locked on Eleanor. She slowly stood up, her gaze fixed on my face with an intensity that made my breath catch. She took a step toward me, her voice barely a whisper. "Where did you get this?" she asked, holding up the tarnished silver. "Please, you have to tell me the truth. Where did you get this locket?" The room fell into a dead silence as I stared at the woman I had spent my entire life searching for. Richard rolled his eyes, clearly annoyed. "Eleanor, stop being dramatic. He probably stole it. I'm firing him right now." But Eleanor kept her tear-filled eyes locked on mine. I swallowed the huge lump in my throat, my voice surprisingly steady. "I didn't steal it," I said softly. "It's mine. It's the only thing I have from my birth mother. It was tucked inside my baby blanket when she dropped me off at the hospital 28 years ago. There's a picture inside and an engraving that says E. Vance." Eleanor let out a guttural sob that came from the deepest part of her soul. The locket dropped from her hands, hitting the carpet. She covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Her legs gave out, and she collapsed to her knees right in front of me, crying hysterically as the reality of my words washed over her. I rushed forward and dropped to my knees, catching her by the shoulders. She grabbed my arms with a desperate grip. "I'm so sorry," she wailed, burying her face into my chest. "I was so young. I was terrified. My family forced me to do it. I never stopped looking for you. My beautiful boy. My son." The word hit me like a freight train. I had waited 28 years to hear someone call me that. I wrapped my arms around her, pulling her tightly against me, and started crying just as hard. All the years of loneliness, all the pain of feeling unwanted, washed away in that single embrace. We knelt there on the floor of that cold office, a mother and son finally reunited. But the beautiful moment was abruptly interrupted by the sound of Richard's chair violently scraping against the hardwood floor as he stood up in pure rage.
"What the hell is going on here?" Richard bellowed, pointing a shaking finger at us. "Eleanor, get away from that trash! He's scamming you!" Eleanor slowly stopped crying. She pulled back, wiped my tears with her thumbs, and stood up. The fragile woman I had seen before was completely gone, replaced by someone with a spine of pure steel. She turned to face her husband, her eyes burning with a fierce fury. "Don't you ever call my son trash again," she said, her voice dangerously low. "He is my flesh and blood. He is the true heir to the Vance family. And you, Richard, are nothing but a cruel, pathetic bully who I allowed to run my father's company because I was too depressed to do it myself. I saw the security footage from the boardroom. I saw you deliberately pour boiling coffee on an innocent employee." Richard's face turned completely white. He started backing away, his arrogance shattered. "Eleanor, please, I didn't know he was yours. We can fix this."
"There is nothing to fix," Eleanor interrupted, her voice echoing with absolute authority. "I own 60% of the voting shares in this conglomerate. The board answers to me, not you. As of this exact second, you are fired. You're stripped of your title, and I am filing for divorce this afternoon. You will pack your belongings in a single box, and security will escort you out. If you ever come near my son again, I will bury you." It was the most glorious, satisfying moment of my entire life. The mighty tyrant, the man who had humiliated me in front of the world, was reduced to a stuttering, pathetic mess, completely destroyed by the quiet wife he had underestimated. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within an hour, Richard was escorted out of the lobby by massive security guards, carrying a small box of his things, while dozens of employees, including Sarah, watched in stunned, gleeful silence. He lost everything. As for me, I didn't go back to the basement. Eleanor took my hand, led me out of that building, and we drove to her home. We spent the next 3 days sitting in her living room, crying, and telling each other the stories of the last 28 years. I learned about the controlling parents who forced her to give me up, and she learned about my struggles. It wasn't an instant fairy tale. We had a lot of trauma to unpack. But for the first time in my existence, I wasn't alone. I had a mother who loved me fiercely, and I finally had a place where I truly belonged. Looking back on that horrible day in the boardroom, I realized that sometimes the universe puts us through the most agonizing pain just to push us toward our destiny. If Richard hadn't been a monster, if he hadn't poured that coffee on me, my locket never would have fallen, Eleanor never would have seen it, and I might have spent the rest of my life hiding in the shadows. I learned that you should never let someone else's cruelty make you feel small, because you never know what incredible turning point is waiting for you. Now, I have a question for all of you listening. If you were in my shoes, standing in that boardroom with boiling coffee burning your chest, would you have kept your composure? Or would you have punched him right in the face? Let me know in the comments. Until the next story.